Good morning and welcome to Rakestraw Books Live at Home. We're in Danville, California, and we're seeing audience from all over the place, Mexico and Texas and the UK and Ecuador and Brazil. This is at Minnesota. Wow. Okay. Now we're really cooking. So this morning we are delighted to have as our guests Sophie Irwin. We're celebrating the publication of her book, A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting, and she is joined in conversation by Taylor Jenkins Reid, which is incredibly exciting for all of us. The way it's going to go today, I'm Sophie's going to talk about the book for a few minutes. I'm going to bring Taylor back on screen. They're going to talk for about half an hour, 35 minutes, and then I will come back and help field your questions. If you've got questions, drop them into the Ask a Question box at the bottom of the screen. I encourage you to order books from Rakestraw Books. Ordering books makes events like this possible and keeps me off the streets. I would not thrive on the streets. So to order Sophie's book, click the box at the bottom of the screen where it says order a copy of A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting from Rakestraw Books. And I put into chat a link where you can pre-order Taylor's new book, which comes out a little bit later this fall. And you can order that from Rakestraw Books as well. So thanks for joining us today. I'm going to take Taylor and me off screen and let Sophie talk about A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting for a few minutes, and then I'll bring Taylor back. And thanks for joining us, everybody. Glad you're here, wherever you are. Okay, let's do this. How do I do this? It's been a hot minute.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, hi everybody. Thank you so much for coming from so many different places. I hope this is going to be, well, I know this is going to be really good fun. So my book is A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting. It's a historical rom-com set in 1818 in Regency, England, and it follows our heroine, Kitty Talbot, who is the eldest of 5 sisters and starts the novel off hugely in debt. She's inherited a shed load of debt from her parents, who have both sadly passed away. And given that she is a woman and it is 1818, that leaves her in a hugely difficult situation because there's no way for her to earn money enough to pay off this massive debt. So she decides that the only way forward is to head to London to try and find herself a rich husband. So she sets off with her sister, absolutely determined to find herself a very wealthy man. But things aren't that simple. And in order to extract a wealthy aristocrat from the upper echelons of British society, she has to learn how to walk, talk, act, eat, shop, dress like a young aristocratic lady, which she is most definitely not. And shenanigans ensue, and it's I hope a lot of fun. And it's sort of just follows Kitty as she's absolutely determined to use every ounce of resource and cleverness and cunning to get what she wants, and no one, not even the very dashing Lord Radcliffe, is going to stand in her way. It was so much fun to write. I got to spend so much time in Regency, England, which I just think is the most deliciously escapist period possible, and I hope it's just this perfect sort of fun summer read for you all to enjoy. And if you are already fans of the Regency rom-com, welcome, this is perfect for you. And if you're not fans, welcome. I hope to be able to introduce you to a genre that I absolutely love, and I just think is a brilliant thing for anybody to get into. So it's lovely to see you all, and I'm so excited to be chatting to Taylor today. Which is great. I think that's my pitch.
Hi, that was great.
Hi,
Very good. Very good job pitching your
thank
own
you.
book, which is not an easy thing to do.
I know.
Um,
We have to fight the imposter syndrome.
I know. Well, and it's also like I feel like you spend years writing it and it becomes so rich and complex in your mind, and then you're like, okay, cool, like whittle it down to 2 sentences, and it's hard.
I
It's
know.
hard to do.
I know. It's
Um, this book is fantastic. It is one
thanks
of
so
my favorite
much.
books of the year. I think it is so special and so smart and so sharp. And I want to get into
Thank
some of
you.
that sharpness, which I think is my favorite part of it. And I think one of the things that you're doing with this that is fresh and new and hasn't been done before. But before we get into any of that,
Mhm.
this is your debut novel. So how how did this idea come to you? How did all of this start for you?
Oh, what a question. So, I mean, let's start with the year I was born. Let's start there. Let's go back to the beginning. No, I've always been a massive reader. I think any author is always, the first love comes from being a reader, first of all. And I think I've always, when I was little, I definitely had the pipe dream to be a writer, but it wasn't really something that I took at all seriously until I had the idea for this book, which came from my love of the genre of sort of historical fiction, but historical romance in particular. And I was walking to work one day, very, very early, through sort of London streets, as the sun was rising, because I used to work very early in those days. And I was thinking about my favorite historical romances and how so many of them have these heroines who are just the most perfect, morally, ethically pure people in the world. And the villains are these like mercenary villainous fortune hunters, and I was just thinking about whether you could have a rom-com where those roles were reversed and the heroine was the fortune hunter, and that still it still didn't detract from her heroine attributes, but sort of embellished and sort of allowed to see that drive that we see in women now attacking their careers, really. Because marriage back in those days was, for a certain class of women, a career, because it would change everything that came afterwards for you and for your family. So yeah, that's where the sort of idea came, and then pretty much hot on those heels, Kitty sort of just like ran into my head and started organizing stuff. So yeah, took
Yeah,
over from there.
that's my next question, is because, if this idea, which makes a lot of sense, was so based on those two characters,
Mm.
and in some ways swapping their positions, how long did it take before Kitty and Lord Radcliffe came really clear to you? Was it like once you had the idea that this woman was a fortune hunter, where you're like, oh, her name is Kitty, here's why? Or like, how did Kitty and Lord Radcliffe come about?
Yes. Okay, Kitty was very soon, and her name also came very soon because she is named after one of the Bennet sisters.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the silliest sister, and I really
Mm-hmm.
liked that as sort of just like a little personal joke to me, that she
Mm-hmm.
was a very driven, determined, ruthless character, but she had this sort of like silly name. And yeah, so she came very early on because I wanted, in order for her to be a fortune hunter, I knew she needed to have this huge drive that came from a real place of desperation. So everything about her fell into place, or her backstory, these sisters she had to look after, this debt that she had to overcome very quickly. And then Lord Radcliffe was the next person to come in, because the first scene I had in my head, which actually I don't think changed basically at all, the dialogue between them, was in the first big scene they have, which sort of comes, a quarter way through the book, where they have this big fight basically, and he calls her a fortune hunter and says, "You're a terrible person," and she's like, "You're naive, and I'm going to carry on anyway," and they have this big showdown, and that came pretty much exactly as it is in the book very early, and I sort of unraveled who they were from there. So yes, their relationship was always sort of the first thing that came to me.
They feel very fully realized, and so you've done a beautiful job of
Oh, thank you.
of what appears to be just sort of putting them in the same place and letting everything unfold, which
Mm,
is really hard to do. No, I know that you've always loved Regency romances, and so that's
mm.
part of what brought you here. What is it about Regency romances in particular, and what have been some of your favorites?
Great question. God, I think they're just so built for escapism. It's unbelievable. I think it's this sort of very rich backdrop, this sort of last decade of like Georgian decadence before the Victorian sort of Puritanism started to come in, and with this like hugely distinct visual and architectural and fashion style, which obviously sort of made hugely famous by all of Jane Austen's novels. And we
Mhm.
have this really distinct idea of the Regency because of Jane Austen, which just makes it just like this like very beautiful place to go to when things are very stressful in the modern world, which I think I've always found very powerful. I think the best escapism I've ever really known and read. And Jane Austen, obviously the Queen herself, is definitely someone who I loved, still love. And then my next favorite Regency romance author is Georgia Hare, who's sort of like Jane Austen's granddaughter in spirit, is how I sort of describe her. And she's tragically overlooked. So if people haven't heard of her or haven't read her, oh my God, you've got so many great books to read. So
Which one would you say
them.
is your favorite of hers? Or where do you think people should start?
Yeah, because those are actually two different questions. Because
Arabella
Arabella is a great starting point.
Okay.
And my favorite is a book called Cotillion, but you shouldn't read that until you've read lots of her others, because she sort of starts playing with her own genre. And she basically created all of the tropes we know about Regency romance and we're very familiar with now. Sort of she came up with them.
I'm going to ask you a similar question later, but about Regency romances. So everybody know we're going to come back to this question, but let's talk about fortune hunting, because this is the crux of the book. This is, I think, what makes the book so unique and really fresh and invigorating. And that is the way you have told this story. You have essentially defended women from something that they shouldn't have been given a hard time about in the first place, which is when I, both as a reader and as a storyteller, get very, very excited. And so for me, that's what was so compelling about this book, was very, very early in, this book is rejecting some of the more common assumptions about women during a lot of Regency romances. It is rejecting the idea that a woman in search of a fortune is somehow inherently morally flawed. And so in the society that Kitty lives in, fortune hunting is the only way that she can save her family, essentially. So how important was it to you to take this on, and what did you learn about the lives of women during this period of time?
Yes, I mean, that was the massive starting point, was that how much I just think it's quite amusing, really, about how much anger and suspicion and a sort of degradation that we throw at women for being complicit in a system that they didn't build. So when women, and to this day, you know, we are very suspicious of any woman that sort of games the system or starts to become complicit in her own objectification or anything like that, which is something that you also explore with Evelyn, which is the sort of, how dare you criticize me for a role you put me in, and now I'm doing it better than you ever could have imagined, but you did this, so don't get cross at me now. Which is something it was really important to explore. And it was really interesting as well, because when I was sort of researching the period, you could see this duality happening all the time, even at the time I'm writing in sort of the Regency time, which is these, no one wanted to vocalize in public any kind of mercenary ambition, but there was mercenary ambition all over the place. And I found some fantastic letters. We'd have these like fantastically frank conversations going on between mothers and daughters and aunts and grandparents about sort of identifying, okay, well, this gentleman has this much money and he's going to be here at this time, so maybe you should go to that party and chat to him. And all of these like machinations were going on, but in public you would have to just talk about romance and love, and it had to be behind this sort of soft feminine veneer. No one could acknowledge that behind that was some quite cutthroat decisions being made in real life. So that was the kind of, I guess, the crux of it, was that I wanted Kitty to be absolutely unafraid to acknowledge the sort of uncomfortable economics of marriage and be upfront about it.
It seems like so often, certainly at that time, but even now, there is a structure in place that benefits most of the time white men and that disenfranchises everyone else. And the sense is that if you try to use that system as someone in the anyone else, to then better your situation, instead of the ire being pointed at the system that forces you to do that as your only option, it's pointed at the individual. So instead of it being a structural problem, it's an individual problem. And that if only Kitty had better morals, she would not be doing this. When in fact, all of the points that Lord Radcliffe makes are good points. It is sad for some man to be madly in love with Kitty, and for Kitty to be manipulating him into getting married. There is a sadness for that man there. I'm sorry. You know, like, I'm sorry for him. But at the same time, you haven't given Kitty any other options. And what you do so beautifully is that Kitty is very clear-eyed about saying, you know, is it really so bad? I'm going to be a good wife to him. I'm going to appreciate him. I'm going to love him for what he can do for my family. So it's not, you humanize the situation in a really interesting way, because it's not just a matter of politics. It's people and their hearts. And Lord Radcliffe, obviously, over time, comes to understand that a lot of the things that he's saying are because he has the privilege of being able to say them. And that's what I mean when I say that I think even if people don't necessarily read a lot of Regency romances, this is the one they should read, because I think it is really, really interesting and really smart. And I think we've seen a lot of books that are imitating Jane Austen, which is great. Send me all of the books imitating Jane Austen. As you said, she is the queen, but it is 2022. And looking at these stories through a more modern lens presents something, it allows for a couple of conversations we haven't had yet. And so I think that's what your book does, and does make it really special. And to be honest, I was reading it and I was like, this feels like what Evelyn Hugo would be doing in 1818. And I think that was what was so exciting to me about it. So, you know, one of the things that was exciting to me about writing Evelyn Hugo is that, we're talking about a long time ago. You know, I'm talking about the 1950s and 60s. You're talking about much longer ago, 1818. But we're still doing these things, right? Like the maybe the details have changed, but the structures are in place. So do you think there are ways in which we are still doing this to women? And in addition to that question, another very heavy question, which is, do you think there's a difference between how this would have gone in America versus Britain at the same time? Because I think America and Britain are a bit different in terms of the social mores, and also the way you move up social classes. We're a bit crasser and more overt over here. And so I'm curious, what is uniquely 1818 Britain about this, and what are the things that you think would change in another time and place?
Yeah, wow, what a great question. I think that, I mean, yes, we are definitely still doing this to women, sadly. Hugely. I'm trying to think about that. I mean, there's so many different examples. Anytime, or like in general, and it can be a lot of women on women crime. You know, we castigate women for being vain, but we demand they're beautiful. You know, things like influencer culture, I think, is a really interesting comparison point, because a lot of people, that's a strange like sticking point for feminism, where they still have this antipathy towards women influencers, and sort of the unpicking of how much we hold influencers or any sort of women in the media responsible for the system. Do they have to be role models? Can they just be complicit? Do they have to make a stand? There's so much more pressure placed on women in the public eye to be moral than there is for men. Men we can endlessly forgive. They do say bad things all the time, and what are they like? Which is obviously bad. That was a little joke for everyone listening.
Well, I just think what you're talking about is it's so true and so prevalent that it's like, who even has time to get it? Like the way that we judge women for wanting to be famous, especially when we can see it, when it's transparent, versus, you know, men who want to get rich some other way, and we're just okay, that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And the sort of the desire for authenticity, but also not too much. All sorts. There's so much here, which is, we've just made it more complicated and more sort of subtextual, but it's
Yeah,
not. I think it's all still there,
yeah,
which is sad. You think in 200 years there'd be more progress, but alas.
yeah.
Yeah, and the question about like American culture versus British is another really interesting one. And I would actually, I have this idea for a future book where I would like to see because the Regency like society in New York at this time also
Oh,
fascinating,
so fascinating.
because you had this newness and everyone was
Yes.
aware of the newness, so the old class system structures aren't quite relevant, but everything's still there. And I also think the fear of fortune hunters and also gold diggers is
Yes.
also quite an interesting one in the US, because you have, again, not to speak for your culture, but like obviously
No.
the idea of being self-made is so much more entrenched in the class system. So there's this weird idealizing of
Mm-hmm.
self-madeness, but also
Yes.
a huge class fear of gold diggers. So that's like a
Yes.
quite interesting like push-pull, which I think, whereas I think in the UK at this time they were just like, gold diggers, no, don't come in here.
That's that's a really good point that I hadn't considered before.
Mm,
That both America and Britain are going to judge a woman who marries for money, right?
mhm, yeah,
But in Britain, it's because it's like you don't come from family money. And in
yeah,
America, it's like you didn't make your own money. And
yes,
that's actually two very different judgments. It's
yeah,
like
you're so
it's like
right. Yeah,
we want a woman to go out there and make her own money, today certainly.
yeah,
Um that is it's like the judgment looks similar, but it comes from two different places.
yeah. It comes from like slightly different discomfort at the core.
Yeah,
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 no, it's really interesting.
yeah.
And the
It
class systems as they migrated across the Atlantic at this time and then forged anew, fascinating.
and then the intersection of them, which also becomes really interesting when you have
Mm,
these wealthy heiresses who are now going to marry British men for a
mm,
title, because then the earldom doesn't have any money, so they need the American money, but
yeah,
and it's like it's all really fascinating. um
mm,
Society had much stricter rules and expectations back then. I think we
yeah.
have a lot of rules and expectations now, but they're a little bit murkier. Back then they
Mm.
were very rigid. And so I'm curious, um, was that structure to society, did that lend you a structure to your book, or was it sort of confining of, oh geez, because of certain rules I can't make this happen, or I can't make this happen? Was it constricting, or was it sort of the scaffold on which to build, or both?
Both. Because on
Yeah.
the one hand, a very real problem I had was the fact that women had so few things they could do that,
Mm-hmm.
like in terms of scene to scene,
Right.
it was really hard to create variety. So we had to work quite hard to create variety, because otherwise it's just like, okay, she's on a walk now, she's at a ball tomorrow, she's probably gonna have a walk again. So it's like we had to really like to try and keep that interesting. We did a lot of like, okay, where can she go, and she's gonna like, so really worked hard
Yeah.
to. So that was difficult, but the scaffolding point is exactly right, because Kitty was an outsider. It was such a beautiful opportunity to explore the rules and see her either break them or not know about them or come up against them or discuss them. So it was a really interesting, um for me as a writer, it was a really useful way to like enter into this whole world, because I had sort of like a proxy modern,
Mm-hmm.
someone outsider person who could then encounter all of this and
Yes.
sort of work her way through the scaffolding, as it were. Yeah.
And what was your research like? Because I would find it very intimidating to have to, knowing nothing about this world, only being a reader of this world.
Mm.
It seems like there's probably a lot to learn.
Yes, there was. There was. Yeah, it was a long and honestly ongoing, I'm learning new stuff all of the time, process. Um, I mean, what's brilliant is that this period is written about hugely like in historical academics are writing. I've written so many brilliant books, so many useful accounts. There's letters and diaries because this was a hugely literate time. This was like the first
Mm-hmm.
sort of at this time the peak literacy. So that everybody was writing stuff all the time. So that was fantastic. And I just read and read and read and read, and I looked at old maps and sort of made massive use of all the sort of records and museums that we have here in London. The slight issue I had was that quite a lot of the social ritualism, um, because the inherently so at this time, obviously, we have the rise of the middle classes, the rise of middle class wealth, and a huge class fear for the upper classes around this. So we had the shift from the main cultural currency, rather than being actual currency, it had to be this like social ritualism currency.
Mm-hmm.
So it was actually not really within anybody's best interest to make a
To
record of
write
it.
it down. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
because it had to
Okay.
be like shifting, updating. You had to know, oh, we don't do that anymore this year. And
Yeah. Yeah.
you had to know about the fashions changing, you had to know all of that without necessarily having it written down in a book. And there was these rise of these like conduct books to try and like teach the middle classes like how to
Mm-hmm.
sort of ape the behavior, but it wasn't like necessarily accurate. So that was quite an interesting, complicated, like, yeah, issue I had
Fascinating.
researching. Yeah,
It's a club, and as soon as people figure out where the door is, the club moves. That's kind of,
exactly.
the idea.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And okay, so what about this is another thing that I find very intimidating is the language. How did you
Mm.
learn how to talk like you're in 19th century London? What was that process like? What were the big hurdles to overcome in how you would
Mm.
naturally say something versus how they would say something? What was that process like?
Yeah, I've got twofold. I've got my serious answer and my non-serious answer here.
I want
The
both. Good.
the serious answer is that I read a lot of letters and diaries, and that was really helpful because the way they spoke was so elegantly and precisely constructed, which is so interesting. So off the cuff, can you imagine like just having these like incredibly detailed little sentences where the last word makes the whole thing a joke, and it's just incredibly precise, which was beautiful to read because you'd be reading these
Hmm.
letters like about something really boring, but it's like fantastically written. And so that was like a hugely wonderful thing to like get my teeth into, were all the letters, and that really helped me with like the construction of sort of the structure of it. And I learned so many fantastic like new words. So Regency slang is my favorite thing in the world. Like you'd start saying like instead of being like, oh, I made a fool of myself last night, you'd be like, I made a cake of myself last night, and or a cake of
A
yourself,
cake of
and
yourself.
yeah, which I love. And instead of saying like I'm broke this week, you'd be like, I'm cucumberish. Cucumber.
Cucumberish.
Yeah, like the vegetable cucumber. You'd be cucumberish. Yeah.
I'm trying to
Well,
figure out. I mean, look, there's a lot of our slang that doesn't make
yeah,
any sense. And if someone heard it out of context, they would be like, I don't see any connection. But like,
yeah.
how do you make a cake of yourself? Like, what is like in my head? I'm like, oh, it's because there were layers to and it's like, no. But like a
Yeah. Or
cucumber,
like
is
a
it like
cake's stupid, or a cucumber. A cucumber, I kind of think if it's because it's watery on the
that?
inside.
Okay, I was
So
wondering if it
you,
was a
yeah,
watery thing, but I don't know
yeah.
why I don't,
Like
like, I
maybe,
still can't. It's just sort of empty.
yeah. So
Like,
like
it's
you
like
look
there's
like,
nothing to it.
yeah, there's nothing in me. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Wow. All right.
I
Well,
don't know,
that's a
but we
thing.
should bring it
Now I
back,
know.
I think.
We should.
We'll
Yeah.
start
Sorry, I
doing
can't
it.
make it. I'm cucumberish this
Like I'm
week.
Eucharish, and everyone be like, "Is it like a
Okay.
disease?" Yeah. So that was
That's great.
that's my serious answer, and then the non-serious answer is I was really helped by. So I went home for lockdown, which was when I was
Hmm.
writing the book, and me and my family at this time were like started like binge watching all these series we had never seen before, like The Crown, Downton Abbey,
Hmm.
things like that.
Yeah.
And honestly, so much of it was just really helpful because we would just start as for fun, like speaking like the Queen and being like, oh no, darling, no. Like we'd really, and that really weirdly helped me sometimes
Oh,
if I,
I 100%
yeah,
believe it. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I
you just
feel
start
like,
saying like the queen.
tell me if this is true, but I feel like you do that long enough and you get to know Kitty and who she is as a character long enough,
Mm,
and she starts speaking to you in
yeah,
that tone and that voice where it's you suddenly are like, where did that come from? But
yeah,
it's like she's just you figured out her voice, you understand a little bit about her speech patterns and she starts to talk to you that way.
exactly. And she
Yeah.
just lots of like throwaway comments like, "Oh no, 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 don't do that, darling, no." So helpful.
So what do you I have my own answers about this. So I'm not asking this question because I think it's an original question. I'm asking this
Mm.
question because I want to hear your answer, which is what do you think it is about the marriage plot that we as a society just can never get enough of? What do you think it is?
Oh, I've got so many answers to this.
Great.
I'm constantly thinking about that. I think it's because it's the safety of going into a piece of fiction knowing the ending
Mhm.
just creates this like release, I think, for all kinds of
Mhm.
like rom-coms in general. I think whatever like version of the marriage plot it is, I think there is
Mhm.
something very soothing about being like, I'm gonna start this book, we're gonna go on this journey, but I know the ending is safe, so I can
Mhm.
relax into it. And I think there's like this safety. And then within that, I think, especially now, modern sort of writers really flirt with the reader a bit because they're like, I know that you know this is going to end well, but I'm really going to play you until that point, which I think makes it really fun. So I think psychologically brilliant. I think there's also like not to read too much into it, but I think that there's something about hope in there that
Mhm.
I think is really relevant to some dark times,
Oh
like
yeah.
that even whatever happens, things are kind of going to be all right. Don't worry about it. I think there's a
Mhm.
little subtextual message there, which I think is particularly relevant for like historical romance because
Mhm.
you get this message of endurance that people were falling in love then, people are falling in love
Yes.
now. Ultimately, we're the same. We will endure. We will survive. I think there's something there as well. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. Why do you think?
I heard this quote once, and
Mm,
it was in a oddly enough, it was I was listening to a great courses lecture,
yeah.
and it was about like literature in the Western canon or something, and
Mm,
there was this professor, and he went by and he said it so quickly, and I kept rewinding to try and figure out who he'd said it, and I could never get it, so I don't know who
mm,
said this,
yeah.
but it like completely changed it didn't change my mind, but it explained to me how I feel, which is that when you
Mm,
think about I think there's a lot of sense in our culture that like books about war or political dramas are like,
mm,
those are important works and marriage plot is not important. That things that interest men are, and things that interest women or
yeah.
whatever. But he said, think of your life
Mm,
and the drama of your life. Um, which one was more important, war or who you married? And
ah,
I to me that really says it. Ultimately,
mm,
some of the biggest drama of our lives, the most excitement, the most happiness, and the most tragedy and fear and heartbreak, it all comes from the marriage plot. It comes from
yeah.
who are you here to find? I think that is
Mm,
the central drama of our lives a lot of the time. Not for every person, um, but
I love that.
it it's been the drama
And
of
not in
my
the
life.
same way, but yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
like
exactly.
who am I here to love? I
Mm,
mean, is that not
mm,
the meaning of my life?
yeah,
Who I choose to love then affects what my family looks like and the rest of the people that I love. It defines everything. When I'm going to
yeah,
war, it's to protect those people that I love, in theory. Um,
yeah.
I think
No,
I
you're
think
so
it's the
right.
drama of our lives, and I think that's why we like to read about it, and I think that's why it's so silly when it's um not respected. People want to
Mm,
read romance novels because we want romance in our lives. It's the center of our life. and
No,
people
so
that
true, so
don't
true.
respect that, I think it's really silly. And I think what
I
you've
know,
done
and so
here,
sad.
it is sad. And I
Yeah,
think
poor lambs.
what you've done, and what I'm really excited now that this book is out in the US. I want to talk to you about that for in a moment, but
Mm,
um I think this book is the perfect example of when someone says, "Oh, I don't really like romance," and they assume that there's not something really smart and really brilliant, and that romance can't have something to say, which is just
yeah.
completely wrong. This
Mm,
book is prime example of, you can tell a really swoony story that is super cute and really fun to read, but also
mm.
has a really strong point of view and moves the conversation forward in an interesting way.
Really
So
kind. Thank you.
well, you deserve it. You were published in the UK a couple months
Mhm,
ago. Now you're
mhm,
published in the US.
mhm.
How has it been to put this book out into the world and watch it take off on its own? I know it's always hard, but I know it's always amazing too. What have been some of the best parts?
Oh, it's been so much fun. I'm like so not over it. I'm so not cool about it yet. I'm just buzzing all the time. It's just been fantastic. Get like speaking to readers. That's been the main brilliant thing is people coming to say hi on social media and from all over the world, and they tell me their favorite bits, which I love because also it's like so many different things which I would never have occurred to me, and they tell me they know what they thought, which is brilliant. And that still to me is so insane
Yeah.
because for
Yes.
ages it was just me writing in secret,
Mhm.
and I still can't quite believe that everyone gets to read it now. And yes, it's been brilliant. It's been really brilliant. And everyone in the
Uh,
US has been so welcoming, which is really nice.
well, good. I really think people, readers here are going to enjoy it, and really encourage people to pick it up and recommend it to their friends. Um, I think that people are going to read this book, and if they either read a lot of Regency romances, then they're going to love it. But if this is the first Regency romance
Mm,
that people have read and loved, and they like um, the the modern take on it, which is what you have here,
mm.
who should they read next? So I know obviously Jane Austen. Everybody loves Jane Austen, and you had said Georgette Heyer. Heyer? Is that
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, I think
Who
so.
I had not read before, so now that's what I'm going to
Brilliant.
go do.
Yes.
Are there
Yeah.
writers today doing stuff in this space that you really like or would recommend? Are there just romance writers that aren't Regency but are doing something you think is interesting?
All yes to all the above. Who do I recommend? I mean, obviously you've got the fantastic Julia Quinn doing her sort of
Mm-hmm.
raunchy take
Mm-hmm.
on the Regency, which I iconic, well worth a read.
Yes.
You have Tessa Dare who's writing in the space, who
Mm-hmm.
also is brilliant. Lex Croucher, I'd really recommend, who is sort of writes these, very sharp, almost gossip girly, modern take on the Regency. She's releasing something called Reputation. I think another one coming out next year, or maybe this year, which is brilliant. I mean, in terms of modern rom-com, like contemporary rom-coms, um, Emily Henry. If you haven't read her yet,
So good. So good.
go away, do that now. She's
Yeah.
brilliant. She's so sharp. I love Kevin Kwan because I think
Mm-hmm.
he is able to do the um huge cast, the family
Mm-hmm.
rom-com, if that makes sense, with the
Yeah.
huge cast of family in a brilliant way, which I love, and I'm very jealous of. Lindsay Kelk, brilliant. Vari McFarlane, iconic. You've got some Neve Hagen, just written a book called 12 Days of May, which is brilliant. Yeah, so I'm a big, and if you need a
These are
rom-com
great.
recommendation, come and find me because
Yeah.
I've got them all up here.
Well, I'm going to. All
Yeah.
right. One last question for you before we get into audience questions. And so
Mm.
I'm buying you guys a few minutes of time, maybe. Put your questions in the question box now. It's going to be oh, you know what? My kid is here. I'm sorry. You want me to give you a hug? Hi, everyone.
Yeah.
Sorry. I love you. Okay, have fun, okay? All right,
Yeah.
bye, honey. Okay.
She's
Um,
going out.
she's going to ballet. So
Oh,
she'll be home soon, but
yeah.
she's going to ballet and then a drum lesson because she's
Oh my
badass.
God. Oh,
Um,
fantastic. I did
all
one
right.
ballet class when I was 5, and I was asked to leave. I don't know why. I was asking
I
you.
don't believe that. They don't do that to children. They
I think
don't.
they asked my mum to make me leave. Yeah.
They were like, you know what? This isn't gonna pan out for Sophie. She
No.
seems a little bit
So
more bookish, maybe.
yeah.
Maybe get her some books.
Exactly.
All right. So get your questions in the box. In the meantime, this is
Mm.
my last question. You do not have to answer it. You can be as cagey as you want to be. I will not
Oh.
press you. But if people love this and they want to know when they can read another one of your books, what are you working on next? What could we look forward to in the future?
Oh, I'm really excited about what I'm working on next.
Yay.
So next spring, summer, title to be announced. But it's about a woman called Eliza who, before the novel begins, she does the marriage of convenience, marries a man a lot older than herself for the sake of her family, has an unhappy marriage, but brilliantly, fortuitously, at the beginning of the novel, he dies, leaving her. She doesn't kill him, to be clear. She doesn't kill him. But suddenly she's this rich, titled, independent widow, and has got this second chance at life and love, and sort of heads off to Bath, and encounters the man that she fell in love with in her youth, and other handsome men, and sees her dreams. That's the crux of the novel. I
I
haven't quite got that pitch
need to
nailed yet.
read this book. I need to read this book. Also,
Yeah.
Bath is like one of my favorite places. It's such a
That's so
great city.
great.
Um,
Yeah.
please give me that book.
Yeah.
that is what I was like. Please give me that book.
Yeah.
All right, great. Well, I love this. Let's get into some audience questions now. But this has been great.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Actually,
Absolutely.
I have
That
a
was
question for
terrific.
Taylor. Can I ask Taylor a question to start with?
Sure.
I'm
Sorry,
here.
no, sorry, guys. I'm asking questions now. Because you have written like historical and contemporary, but
Hmm.
also the contemporaries you've written have also feel like they've all got very rich. Feels like you've done like a lot of research for them as well. What is there like? Do you find the process hugely different doing historicals? Like not,
I think it's
you
I
know.
think it's a totally different job. I really
Okay,
do.
yeah.
I think it's totally different. I think contemporary, you have to do research about the things that you're writing about.
Mm,
When I write about like a helicopter going down over the Pacific, I have to figure out like what island is where and how someone could float and logistics and all that. But um it's not it's it's not the same in terms of needing to essentially like with my books now, I throw myself into like a 6 week like um class where I learn
yeah, okay,
everything there
yeah.
is. It's such a deep dive that like I didn't know anything about tennis really, and suddenly it's
Yes.
like I'm like, oh, Federer's like this and Nadal's like this and Serena's got that big serve,
Yeah,
and and like I'm
yeah,
learning it all,
yeah.
um and I just don't know if I would go back to contemporary in the time anytime soon, only because I think I would
Mm,
really miss that research period where
yeah,
I
the
get to
class,
like
yeah.
become a very superficial, temporary expert on something. Like it's so funny because now people will be like, "Oh, you know this 70s rock band?" And I'm like, I
Yes, I
probably
do.
did 3
Yeah.
years ago, but like I I I am a temporary expert in these
Yeah.
things, like so like I know a lot about 70s rock and I know a lot about surfing and I know a lot about tennis. But like if you
Mm,
catch me at the right minute, I'll remember, but there are times when I'm like, I know I wrote about that.
yeah,
But it
but
was
it's
like 3
gone.
books
Yeah.
ago, but like
Yeah.
I get to like pretend I am somebody,
I
which
love that.
yeah, and I think that's what good historical fiction can do is make the reader feel like they're in that world too, and that's what your book
Mm.
does is it feels you feel lost in that time, and I don't know, I would imagine this is true for you as a writer, you get lost in it too.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. No, I actually have to stop. The other day, I went out and I chat to my neighbour, and we had some flower pots stolen from the road. And I'd just been writing, so I was like in Regency headspace, and she was like, "Oh, this is so annoying. Who could do something like this?" And I was like, "Scoundrels!" And she was like, I had sort of forgotten that I needed like transition back into like modern English.
You have to be Sophie
Yeah,
Irwin now. You can't
yeah,
be
not like a
Eliza. Yeah.
crazy, yeah.
That's great.
Hmm.
Okay, so I've got some audience questions. I like this one. When researching the book, did you come across interesting information that you just couldn't use?
That's a good question.
Yes. Oh my God, I love that question. Um, so much great stuff. And there'd be times when I would be so desperate to shoehorn in a piece of research I liked that I was like contemplating like rewriting the whole book, and then had to be like, no, leave it, it's fine. So yeah, my favorite ever thing that I found out was actually about a fashion, like a fashion trend in the 1790s, which is obviously like 30 years too early. So I couldn't use it. I was going to do like a flashback, but it didn't work. But it was this whole fashion around hats, which was putting like fresh fruit and vegetables on your hat and like sewing them onto your hat. So you'd like walk down the street, people would be there with like strawberries and apricots and like on their hats. And there was this one story of this woman who like saw like someone with like a marrow on their hat, like I'm trying to think what's the American word for
A
marrow.
zucchini. A
Zucchini, thank you.
zucchini.
Like a zucchini, just
Yeah,
like
Thank you.
squash.
I was not gonna get that. Okay.
no, I was a zucchini just like squashed on the hat. I loved that, and everyone was like, "Oh, this vegetable headwear was all the rage." That was my favorite thing.
Um, it was the logic behind putting fruit on a hat that like you're so rich you don't even need this food, you're using it for your hat, or would people eat it?
So,
Yeah, I don't
so
know.
there was this moment. It started with Marie Antoinette and Rousseau and the simple life and the country life, and there was this
Yeah.
real sort of romantic simplicity. So Marie Antoinette builds this mock rural
Mm,
village at Versailles
mm,
where
Yeah.
there are porcelain milk pails, and she gets painted as a shepherdess. And as that really expensive high fashion drifts down the food chain, anybody can put an apple in their hat.
yeah. Yeah,
So
just
it's
like
like
I'm
the
just so
ready to
of the
wear
earth.
version of couture.
Yeah. It's like
I wrote
yeah,
a paper
fast
on this at
fashion.
university.
Yeah.
I know this one.
Do you know this one? Fantastic. I love that. I just think it's great for
Um,
snacking because you could
Yeah,
just,
right. If you're hungry,
yeah, just,
yeah.
balls along. You could be like,
yeah.
Yeah, but it was really this
yeah.
look at me, I'm a
Mm,
person of the people, you
Oh
yeah.
know.
man,
I'm
And
so
it was
down
this
that's
for.
too
antidote to
good.
the intense artificiality of court life.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, I love
You're
that.
gonna
We
put
should
an
chat
apple on
about
your
your
head.
paper. Yeah.
yep.
Yeah.
It didn't fool anybody, for the record.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but it really, one of the things that it did was actually get this one woman artist who became Marie Antoinette's favorite portrait painter centered, and I'm blanking on her name for the moment, but it'll come to me. But she painted an awful lot of women in this sort of
Mm,
Oh,
rural
I see.
ideal,
Yeah.
and
yeah.
she was one of the first really popular women society painters.
It's
And
kind of like
she's fabulous.
cottage core, but for the
Yes.
1700s.
Yeah,
It's like
Yes,
100%.
I pretend
yes,
that I go to the cottage, but actually I live in New York City. It's like
Yeah.
that.
right,
I love
Yeah,
it.
right,
exactly.
right.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Love cottage
yeah,
core, love the apple hats.
Yeah.
absolutely. There we are. So, and of course, I mean, you see it also like in Regency, in the
Mm,
kind of the cotton simple dresses, that kind of unstructured stuff that women started wearing versus what they had been wearing before the French
mm,
Revolution, which was much more like
structured.
there was a lot more going on. There was a
Mm,
lot
Hmm.
less freedom of movement, and women in the early 19th century got a little bit more freedom um,
mm,
in just what they were wearing, which allowed them to move differently.
Yeah.
mm,
Like if you're not weighed down with petticoats, there was something called the Versailles. It was glide, but women's legs were so pinned together by the petticoats, by the structure of the dress, that they could only
mm.
take these tiny steps. So it looked
Yeah.
like they were floating along.
Yeah.
You don't see Eliza Bennett floating along.
No.
She's walking,
No.
she's striding along. She's getting mud on those skirts.
Yeah.
That would never have been possible before.
Mm,
And so it actually
100%.
Interesting.
had a good kind of outcome. And then, of course, we take it all back and slip into the
Yeah,
Victorian period where,
exactly. And there's
again,
Yeah.
this last moment. Mm,
Yeah.
right. Um, Okay, so somebody asks a couple, sort of structural questions. How writers relate
Mm.
to each other in the writing process? Do you ever ask somebody, "Hey, I'm having a moment with this scene, this character, this draft. Would you look at it?" Do people ever help each other that way?
Ooh. I'm too nervous as it currently stands because my drafts I think are so terrible that I don't want to expose anybody to them. So my wonderful editors Martha and Pam and Jeremy and Marie are the first people that helped me, and my agent as well. But I think it would be a really great thing. Sometimes I have a few friends who are also writers who I discuss like, oh, I'm having this problem, we talk it through, and that was often very helpful. But I don't know, what about you, Taylor?
My husband is a screenwriter, and so he really knows how to tell a story, and so
Mm,
everything I do, he's integrally involved in, and so I feel like I have that to bounce off of. The problem I find with consulting another creative,
mm,
um, is that on some level, only I will find the answer. Like
yeah,
occasionally someone will say something that will trip something in me and I'm like, that's really good. I'm going to use that. Is that okay? But um in general, I think what I need is to be able to say stuff and have the other
yeah,
person say things back at me that's going to trigger an idea in my own head. And so that is so self involved and so like I'm just not going to submit that as someone else to that
mm,
process of like no no no
yeah.
no 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 but I did figure it out on my own while we were having this conversation, thank you, it's like um but I am fortunate in that my husband has to deal with me
It's so
in those
useful,
conversations
yeah,
and knows how to tell a story.
yeah.
And so I have him as my beta reader all the time, which is great. Very
Oh,
fortunate.
which is brilliant. Yeah, he can't. He
Yeah.
has contractually, he has to. You know.
Legally, there's nothing he can do.
No,
He
it was
he
right there
can't
in the
leave the
vows.
house.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
So somebody asks, "How do you know when you're done? How do you know when it's
oh,
ready?" And this is something we
Yeah.
see with,
mm,
with people who are, working the same draft for, working the same
yeah.
project. I'm on draft 47. Oh
Yeah.
my God. Finish. Get it out there.
Yeah.
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 So I
What do
don't
you
know.
think, Sophie? Yeah.
Okay, so again, I've only done like 1 3/4 number of books, so I don't think I'm the expert. Book one, in terms of like, there's two different times to be ready, right? There was the getting it to my agent ready, at three, I suppose, then getting it to be taking it out to publishers ready, and then there's like publishing ready. Publishing ready, by that point, luckily you have lots of other people to tell you when it's ready. So they basically like
Yeah.
extract it from your clawed hands. Because I think I could keep tinkering to the end of time. But there's a certain point where I don't know if you have this, Taylor, where you're like, I physically cannot read this book again.
Oh no, like
Um, you
that's
just
my
can't
answer.
read it again. Yeah. Yes,
I
true. That's the answer. Yeah.
I cannot revise something 47 times. My
No.
brain, I'm not a details person. I'm a big picture person. I'm like, this is what I meant to do. I don't, it's probably got
Mhm.
typos in it. I don't know. I need it off my desk. Like
Yeah.
I am like I've taken it as far as I can take it on my own is basically
Mm,
the sentence that comes to my agent every time I turn in a draft. It's like, this is not perfect, but I am done. I
yeah.
can't,
Yeah.
and I think it's just that sense of, I think there's a difference between wanting to get compliments on something, which is a reason why a lot of times you may send something out. I do subconsciously. I'm like, I realize now that you're criticizing it. I just wanted your compliments. But but I
Yeah.
also think there's like this thing that kicks in me where I'm like, I don't care. You may hate it or love it. I don't care. I'm not
Yeah.
working on it again. You know.
Yeah.
I think that's how it is for me.
No, fair enough. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, and I think in any project, one of the things that I have to be careful of is like scope drift. Like I
Yeah.
can keep
What does that
adding.
mean?
Yes. Yeah. Like that
Well,
you
like you're giving
lose
a dinner
sight
party and
of.
you think you need to add another course, you need to add another dish, you need to add more detail. Excuse me. And it's just not productive.
Mhm.
And it
Mm,
takes the that initial gut impulse of this is what I want to do. work with that.
Yeah.
Stop gilding the lily. It's not
Yeah.
usually necessary, and stop
Yeah.
overthinking it,
And
which is
also
very
I
hard for
think,
me since I could overthink anything.
yeah, and I think having the ability to recognize when it is
Mm.
good enough to move to whatever the next stage is its own talent, and is a skill that
Yeah.
you have to hone, right? It's
Mm.
it's that I have friends who it's like they write and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite, and it's never good enough to send somebody. And it's like then that's a skill you need to work on, of recognizing when
Mm.
the point is in there. And if someone's
Yeah.
interested and wants to work with you, they're going to come to it now.
Mm.
It's
Right.
like, knowing that point is like something you have to work on.
Yeah.
And then being able to, recognize that in the process that the editor wants to help hone your voice,
Yeah.
and get to the, help you, not, sometimes we hear, oh, I don't want to send it out because I don't want to lose
Mm.
Oh yeah,
what made it mine. Like,
you have to
you have
include,
to
yeah.
right.
Mm.
Yeah.
Um, okay, a couple comment questions. Somebody
Mm.
says, I think this is directed to Taylor. As a Latina, I want to thank you for giving me the kind of representation I never had from books. Um, Out of the box made babysitter background characters without being unrealistic about their reality. Um, what's your inspiration to write characters like Carrie or Evelyn, and what do you expect people to take from them?
Mm.
I really appreciate that comment, and thank you for that. My inspiration is twofold. One, one of my best friends when I was a kid, and still today, I talk to her every day, is Brazilian, and I love her. I admire how many languages she can speak. I admire the way that she has a much better sense of the larger world than I do, because I am very American and defined by that, whereas she has a Brazilian American experience.
Mm.
I think on some level, I look at the women around me, the Black women in my life, the Latina women in my life, the Asian American women in my life, and I love them, and respect them as the people that they are, and don't think that stories should just be about people that look like me. That's number one. Number two, you know, I could continue to write books about people that look like me. That's probably a safer thing to do. There's always a risk that you're going to get it wrong when you write about someone who's different than you,
Mm.
and the last thing I ever want to do is cause harm. And
Mm.
I certainly put myself in the position where I may cause harm, and I don't
Mm.
want to do that. But I think if I just write about people that look like me, then what I'm doing is centering white women and putting women of color on the sidelines. They are the best friend.
Mm.
And that just doesn't seem right. So it's something I tinker with every day and try to figure out
Mm.
the right move. But when I hear from women of color that something I did meant something to them, it really means a lot, and makes me feel like, okay, maybe I got it right on that one. So thank you.
Good. Okay, well, I'm going to give you one last thing before we close.
Mm.
Um, because I think this was what I thought of when you were talking about why you write about what you write about. And at the beginning of her book, The Gastronomical Me, MFK Fisher wrote, people ask me, why do you write about food and eating and drinking? Why don't you write about the struggle for power and security and about love the way others do? They ask it accusingly, as if I were somehow gross, unfaithful to the honor of my craft. The easiest answer is to say, like most other humans, I am hungry, but there is more than that. It seems to me that our three basic needs for food and security and love are so mixed and mingled and entwined that we cannot straightly think of one without the others. So it happens that when I write of hunger, I am really writing about love and the hunger for it, and warmth and the love of it and the hunger for it, and then the warmth and richness and fine reality of hunger satisfied, and it is all one.
I
Oh,
love
that's
that.
brilliant.
Yeah, it's a
That's really
gorgeous book. If
beautiful.
you haven't
What
read
is
it,
that book?
this is an
Will
old
you
copy.
show, what is it called? The
The
gas
Gastronomical.
Gastronomical Me.
Okay.
which is
I love
part
that.
memoir and part food. And Clifton Fadiman wrote, MFK Fisher writes about food as others do about love, but rather better. In this book, she does both. So
Aw,
I've
it's a
got to read that
fantastic
book.
book.
that sounds
That's great.
fantastic.
It's in print.
Oh,
Anyway,
always good.
I want to thank you both. This has been just a terrific way to start a day. Such an enjoyable conversation. And I hope that we will see you in person sometime soon. And I would encourage you again, please click that green bar at the bottom of your screen. Order a copy of Sophie's book, A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting from Rakestraw. We're happy to ship. And I want to thank you both so much for coming. If you want to come back to this event and watch it again, find a particular favorite bit or share it with a friend or your book group, the replay will be available. Just follow the same link you followed to get to the live event, and you can watch it again. So thank you so much, both of you. Thank you, Sophie
Brilliant.
Thank
and
you
Taylor, for
guys.
joining
Thank you guys
us.
so much, and thanks
This
for
was
coming. This
great.
has been so much fun. I've enjoyed myself.
Me too. Great.
Yeah.
Well,
Absolutely.
thank you.
All right.
All right.
Thanks so
Thank
Talk
much.
you.
soon.
Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe
Bye,
out there.
everybody.
Bye.
And someone's asking if we can get the book to Mexico. We can work it out. So send us a message. Thank you,
There we
everybody.
go. Bye.
Bye.